Good morning, everybody. So for today's video, we're gonna have a look at how to build a React.js image slider. I have an example here in the background that is exactly what we're gonna build. Moving images in the background, and we're gonna have some content in the foreground. In addition to that, we are going to build these indicator dots so we can jump around nice and quickly. Let's jump right into it and start building the image slider with React.js. I'm starting with the React starter template that I built in a previous video, as usual. So feel free to clone that, and then we can get started. In addition to that, I do have an assets folder with a couple of images. So we're going to use that as our slides. And as you can see later, as you will see later on, you can actually have any kind of slides, so they don't have to be images. In this video, I'm just gonna build an image slider, but you can also have normal divs with HTML inside, so a heading, text, whatever you want. And then you can also create a generic slider and then build the image slider on top of that. But for this video, I'm just gonna have one type of slider, which is the image slider. So I'm gonna create a components folder and then have a image slider component inside. Just a basic structure. Now, at the moment, let's maybe have a look at or think a little bit about how we want to structure things. And I'm thinking, so we're gonna have multiple slides, right? Something like this. And then let me just space them out evenly. Okay, and then obviously we don't want all of them visible. So what I would say is we do have, we do have, let's just mark the actual screen in black, and then these are our slides. Now, once we, so as the slider, we obviously want to change the slides, right? We don't want to stick with this one, with the first slide every time. And there's different ways to trigger that, maybe just with a timer. So after maybe 5 seconds, we change the slide to the second slide, third, and so on. Or maybe we want to swipe or drag. That's possible as well. There's arrows. So we can have a look later on what we're gonna use. But yeah, once the structure is set up, you can choose which one to take, right? It's not very hard to change that. So okay, we have this is the default, the base situation that we have, and then once we have our trigger, whatever trigger that is, we kind of slide to the second one, and then we slide to the third one, and how many more we have, and then if we reach the end, we just slide back. There's also the possibility that we kind of put this one back at some point, so it's an infinite loop. But for me, I find it okay to just have like a basic slide with keeping the order, and then once we reach that part or that situation, the end of the slider, then we just slide back. You're gonna see in action later on in action how that'll work out. And for me, I think the user experience is good enough. So so that is it. We're gonna have one wrapper around that, the parent, and then we're gonna have the individual slides that are inside that. So let us go ahead and implement that inside VS Code. So as usual, I'm gonna use styled components as a styling library, but here again, you can choose whatever you like. You can use CSS, you can use inline styles if you want to, but yeah, I like style components. So what do we say? We said we want to have one parent, so we're gonna call that wrapper styled div, and then we're gonna have a slide. We can also make that a div. Okay, and then we are going to return the wrapper, and we're gonna take in. So as I mentioned, you could take in whatever. You could take in components. You can take in, for example, heading in text. But here I'm just gonna have images, right? And this is just gonna be an empty array that we can loop over. And yeah, we're gonna add more props later on, but for now we're just gonna have all the remaining props here on the wrapper. Okay, and then we're gonna have images.map. We're gonna return one slide, and key is, we're just gonna have the index for now. Okay, good. So, well, it's not gonna do much for now because there's no content inside. So let me actually pass down the images. So I'm gonna have slide 1, image 1 from assets, slide 1. Okay. Yeah, I don't really like doing this kind of manual work, but sometimes I can't think of a better way of doing it. So we're just gonna do that by hand real quick. Okay, let's see. There is okay, there's some problem. Assets slide 6 JPEG. Is there a problem? Image 1. Is there a problem? Well, there is a problem. It's just a question of what the problem is. Okay. Assets, slide 1 JPEG. So no transformers found. Okay, let's just try this one. Okay. Well, oh yeah. Okay. So this is a setup that was necessary from the React starter template. Feel free to watch the video on that if you want to know more about this part. But this should work now. Okay, let me change that back. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Let's log that real quick. Okay, very nice. And then let's import the image slider. Components, oops, image slider, very nice. And then we're gonna render that image slider. And then we decided we're gonna have just a prop called images, and in there we're gonna have our images. So here we only have a URL, right? Let me log that again. So when I import it like this with Parcel, Parcel is gonna just spit out a URL that I can use as like an image, and then I could put that in here, right? Image 1. I'm not going to do that, and we're going to do it differently a little bit, but yeah, keep in mind that this is a string that represents the URL of that given image. If you want to have more options, I don't know what you would have. Maybe let's say you have the before mentioned case that you want to have a label and like a heading and a caption. You would have the heading something like this, right? But and an object with multiple keys. But right now, I think we only need the actual URLs, so we should be fine with that. Now let's go back to our image slider, to the component, and log. And yes, we do have all the URLs, so that's very good. Now we can start with the actual implementation. Well, continue with the actual implementation. So we do already have a wrapper, and then for each image that we pass here, we should have one of those slides. So let's have a look real quick. Okay, so we have this should be our wrapper, and then we have 6 slides. Perfect. Now, obviously they don't show up yet because there's no content, right? It's just empty divs, but we're gonna change that in a second. So what I was thinking is to have this image slider the full width of the screen and then a specific height. We could make it, I mean, maybe we should make it full height. I think that's going to look quite nice. And then maybe in the end we can put this heading inside of it as well. But yeah, let's see. Okay, so first off, we're gonna have the wrapper width. Well, actually, I don't need to give it a width because by default, do I not? Do I? No, by default, the div should take up the whole space that we have. So let's maybe just give it a border to see where it is. Okay, there we go. We have the full width. Now a height, I have to give it something because I don't. There's nothing inside yet, and we want to specify the height before. We could have it in the slide as well. It doesn't matter much, but let's just keep it with the wrapper because also with that later on maybe you want to change that, and then you could simply pass a prop and change your width, right? So in here I could have style. Let's say height, and then 80 viewport height. There we go. And since this is passed down here to the wrapper, the props that I received, the style is being forwarded and overrides our height. So yeah, I think it's better to have this in the wrapper so that we can easily override it later on. Okay, all right. So we do have 100 viewport height. Let me just remove the H1 real quick so we don't have any scrolling going on. Very nice. Good. Now on to the slides. The slides are going to be height 100% to take up the whole space from top to bottom, right? And then the width is also going to be 100%. And then, okay, we already see, let me maybe give this a border as well. Let's maybe make that 4 pixels so we can see it better. Okay, so we have the slides just going down Okay. And that's not quite what we want, right? We want it to go out to the right. And for that, I mean, there's also many ways to build that. I like to build it with display flex and flex wrap no wrap, right? So okay, we're gonna change that in a bit. But so if I put display flex, by default, the flex direction is a row, so it's gonna be next to each other, the children, the being the slides, and yeah, by no wrap, I say do not put them in the next row. Basically, just keep them in the same row. Now we're seeing them shrink, even though we say width 100%, and that is because by default flex shrink is 1, so all of the elements shrink with the same ratio. But we don't want to have any shrinking at all. So now we can see that we have them next to each other. Very good. The problem is they're still visible, so we don't want any horizontal scrolling. Rather, we want only the first slide to be visible at this time, at least. So the easy fix for that is overflow X, in particular, hidden. And then we only have the first slide. Very, very good. Now we can decide how we're gonna move the slides to the left based on our position. Maybe we should give them the image first, so we don't need that. So we don't need that green border anymore, and we can differentiate the slides. So for that, I'm gonna use background image here. So I'm gonna say background position center, background size cover. So this stretches the whole image without fiddling with the aspect ratio to fit the whole element. So without skewing the image or anything like that. And then I'm gonna pass the background image as an inline style. Image URL. Maybe, yeah, make that image URL so it's more verbose. Okay, there we go. Let's just quickly remove this so we can see the other slides. Very good. Oh, it looks pretty good already. Not quite functional, but yeah, nice images. Okay, now we can just close that here. We can continue to move the slides. So there is multiple ways of doing that. One way would be maybe to add a margin to the first one. So let me just do that in here. Margin left and then negative 50%. And then you can see it moves. It moves the image. Well, the first slide, it moves the first slide further to the left. And since we used Flexbox, all the other images are going to be moved to the left as well. So even if we keep decreasing the margin left to something below 100%, we're gonna move everything further to the left. So this is one way, and maybe you're gonna use that. Just gonna try a different approach real quick. So a different approach would be to have the slide container or something like that. And the slide container is not, okay, that's slide container. Slide container would be, okay, what's the issue here? Oh, slider container. There we go. Okay, and the slide container. Now we don't see anything because that messed with our setup right now. The slide container, okay, let me actually show that here. So the slide container would be something that we wrap around around the stroke. Let's add something. Okay, so we have our parent, our wrapper, I think we called it, and then we would have a slide container that wraps all the slides but goes out to the right over the edge of the screen as well. And then we could, if we group that, we could simply move the slide container to the left. So these are two approaches how we can move the slides, either with a margin on the first slide or moving a wrapper container around. Now, yes. Okay, so let's try that. I think we're gonna have, well, I would say this one could be a little bit trickier in the later on, but we'll see. The other one should be straightforward, and with the you can adapt that to the same approach. Well, to the margin approach, if you find that easier. Maybe I'm gonna show that real quick later on. Okay, so now let's just recreate what we had. Well, actually, okay, I'm gonna try to see if I can explain why this is gonna be a bit more difficult. Since we do have our slide container that spans out the whole width of all slides, we can no longer add width 100% to our slides, because that would give us what we had before, to have the slides. Well, yeah, we want the slide container to be determined, the width of that determined by the slides. So we cannot really give that 100%, because this one has to be based on that. And since we have multiple slides in there, we cannot have that 100%. So I think what we have to do here is go 100 viewport width. Okay, so that it takes up the full screen. Now this is a bit problematic because you have to be explicit with the width that you want to give. So let's say you want to have a square on your screen, right, that doesn't take up the whole width. You have to give it a fixed width, something like 400 pixels or something like that, and that limits a little bit your freedom, I would say, because then, for example, if you want to have something flexbox, something shrinking, yeah, that's going to be a bit more problematic. So in the end, maybe let's leave it as that with this approach. It works perfectly fine. But let us go back to the margin approach, which is simply removing this one. And okay, that works fine now. Let me just verify real quick to add that here. Margin left minus 50%. Okay, perfect. Works fine. Now all we have to do is to have that dynamic. And now we have to decide what kind of trigger we want to use to move the slides to the left, or at some point back to position 0. So for that, we are going to use a state. Use state. And then we're going to say current slide. Set current slide. Use state 0. Okay, because we're going to start at index 0. Now, okay, and then the first slide, we're going to have margin left. But we only want to assign that if that is the first slide. So we can check if the index is 0. Index is 0. Then we want to give it a value. We're going to calculate that value in a bit. And otherwise, we're just going to have null or undefined. So we don't set any margin. We can also set it to 0, but yeah, I'd rather not set anything. Yeah, and then what is the value that we want to set? So for each step, so let's say active index would be 1. So we want to see this first, the next slide, the second slide. That would mean we would have minus 100%, right? So it would be the current slide times 100. So in the beginning, it's 0. Current slide would be 0, right? And then times 100 is 0, minus 0% is just the same, right? So we would see the first slide. Now, if there's a 1 here, then it would be minus 100%. So that's working, well, we're going to see if that was working fine, but that should work fine. So let's see. Now, if we put that to 1, we see the first slide. 2, first slide. 3, and so on. Well, not first slide, next slide. That's what I mean. Yeah, so that is working fine. Now, let's okay, so I would say let's create a timer. And after a certain time, we move on to the next slide. And we can even make that dynamic. So I would say autoplay is true, because later on maybe we don't want to have autoplay. Autoplay time will be maybe 3,000 for now. Later on you can decrease that, because probably 3,000 is a bit too quick, but for debugging reasons that's gonna be a little bit easier. Okay, so now we're gonna have a use effect, and then whenever the current slide changes, we're gonna set a timer to the autoplay time. Right, and once that time is up, we're gonna set the current slide to the current slide plus 1. And don't forget to clean that up, because otherwise we're gonna have, well, probably not actually, because it's the timeout is just called once. Well, it's not an interval, that's what I mean. All right, so it wouldn't keep running, and so when we set the first timer, the timer is going to be up. Then we're going to increase that to 1, for example, and then the timer is not running anymore. So this is not necessary, but still, it's a better idea to clean that up, because maybe we're going to have more dependencies. For example, the autoplay time. And if that changes, right, if that changes to 5,000, let's say, at some point up in the component hierarchy, we don't want the old timer to still run. So yeah, but if that's too confusing, don't worry about it. Just remember, if you deal with timers, intervals, and whatnot, you may want to clear that. Okay, we do have a problem. Use effect is undefined. Okay. That's an easy fix. Now, okay, well, okay, wow, that's actually working already. Perfect. There we go. Not quite a slider, more like an yeah, just like I don't know how to call that, an image changer. So to fix that, okay, let me increase that so it doesn't move all the time. To fix that, the only thing that we have to do is to transition between each states, and we can do that with CSS. So maybe 750 milliseconds, all is in out. You can put whatever you want here. Oh well, in all three values, and well, all two. And then we can actually that should be it. So let's decrease that to 3000 again and see how that looks like. Yeah, perfect. So that's working quite nicely. Okay, nice. Very nice. Now, the problem that we have here is that we keep increasing. So even though we might only, well, in this case, we have 6 slides, 6 images here, we keep increasing the current slide to something that is greater. Yeah, see, we're at 11 now, even though we only have 6. So what we want to do here is to have a maximum number, and then we can set it to either the maximum number or restart at 0. So yeah, let's do that. The maximum number, actually, does that work? Yeah, no, that doesn't work. So yeah, I was thinking to have that, but then it would be, let's say, 8 or 6 and wouldn't move anymore. So what we want to do is if const new slide index equals current slide greater than the images dot length minus 1. If that is the case, then we're going to set it to 0. Otherwise, we're going to set it to current slide plus 1. Okay, so let's try that. New slide index. Okay, let's try 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now it should switch. There we go. Okay, perfect. So it shows all 6. Well, we started at 0, right? So 0 to 5 is 6. Shows all 6 images, and then it starts at 0 again. And it is animated. So that is working quite nicely. Now, well, yeah, now you could say you're stopping here because that's good enough for you. I would say not quite. Let's maybe add some more stuff. So it's because you really have, sorry, you really have only images. You might want to add something else in here. So as I mentioned earlier, for example, the heading. I'm just going to add that to 30,000. So every 30 seconds, not to have that moving all the time. Okay, and then maybe just children. So children, because then we can go in here in the image slider and have the children and H1. That is a React.js image slider and a paragraph maybe with something like a sub tagline or whatever. Well, let's just do one one sentence. Okay, okay, let's go back here. Children. So this is being passed down here. And then the first idea would be to simply render the children here. But that wouldn't work because remember, we do have our slides. The parent is flex wrap. Flex. It's in a row, right? So the children would simply be rendered here. That's all we want. So one way to solve that is to have a new component, children wrapper maybe. And then we're going to position that absolutely top 50%, left 50%, and transform it back. So this is a neat little trick to center things easily and give it a reference point of position relative to the wrapper. So we can have that here, children wrapper. Okay, there we go. And this is our children wrapper. Okay, let's change that to display flex. Well, actually, this should be agnostic of the styling, I would say. And we can simply have this here. Display flex, flex direction, direction, column. Now this is a little bit, here again, a bit lazy to do it this way. Probably you want to create a component, a style component. But yeah, I think for this example should be good enough. And then we also want to give it maybe white. Okay, perfect. Well, you can also have it simply. You can have a gradient to make the text not look well, to have a good contrast for the text. Yeah, let me maybe do that real quick. So gradient. Oops. Gradient is gonna be here, and then the gradient is gonna be, oops, const gradient is style div width 100%, height 100%, position absolute, top 0, left 0, and then background color no 0.8 maybe. Okay, well, that is not the correct placement. Yeah, let's maybe put that in the slider itself. So let's have the gradient here, and then we can put that in here. Okay, there we go. Now that the gradient is gonna be relative to the wrapper as well, since that is position relative, the next parent with position relative, and then it is rendered before the children, meaning it is below the children. I just saw that before, that the gradient was on top of our text, which is not what we want. Okay, nice. Now that looks quite nice. Maybe one more thing before we wrap up is to add a little indicator that shows how many slides we have and which slide we're on currently. So, okay, let's do this. Maybe let's have a new component indicator. Okay, and then we're gonna have a current slide, and then maybe yeah, call this amount slides. Const indicator wrapper. So what I'm thinking of is have them down here maybe, or maybe in the middle, doesn't matter. Have some small dots in white, for example. And then if it is a current slide, the dot is a little bit brighter than the other ones. Yeah, okay, so is style div. We're gonna have no wrap. That should be good. Const dot. It's also div. And then we're gonna return indicator wrapper, and for each of the slides, so I'm gonna pass down the amount of slides, not the slides itself themselves. So indicator wrapper, and then we're gonna have the current slide is our state, and the amount slides is the images the length. Okay, so that's not an array, it's a number, what we have in here. And for that, we do need to create, so we need to create the dots, right, for each of the slides. So one way of doing that is create a new array with the amount of slides, fill that, and here it doesn't matter what we fill that with, so we can just fill it with zeros or ones or whatever, and then map for each of those index. We're going to need that index in a bit, and render a dot. Okay, so the dot is going to be maybe width, what we're going to have, width 24 pixels. We're going to try out a little bit, we'll see. And border radius 12 pixels, and background color is white, and then we're gonna give it an opacity of 0.6 for now. When you come back to the brightness in a bit. Okay, and then we're gonna have the indicator wrapper. Oops, not indicator wrapper. Actually, the indicator itself. Okay, yeah. So we should give it a key. We can give that a key, which is just the index. That's fine. It's not going to change. And then it's probably at the end. So what we have to do here is also position absolute, and then bottom. Let's put him at the bottom right. So bottom 0. Oh well, 15 pixels, for example. Right, 15 pixels. And here I have a typo. Position. There we go. Okay, well, these are a bit too big, I would say. So let's maybe put 16 pixels. Oops. And the border radius of 8. Still a little bit too big. Maybe 12. 6. Yeah, that's about it. And they're all grouped together, so we might want to add a margin of, let's say, 5 pixels. Yeah, that looks fine. I mean, feel free to adjust that however you want to. Okay, 0.5, and then we need to highlight one, and well, the one that is currently active. So we already have our current slide index, and then we can say is active is when the current slide that we pass down equals the index of the dot. Okay. Well, okay. And now with that, well, here we can, well, what I am doing is I'm accessing the props. This is a style components thing. You can pass down the props here, and then you can access them inside. You can also use inline styles if you want to. So props is active is 1, and otherwise going to be 0.5. Right, and this is how it works. You could also go the same thing here, right? You can have a style and then pass the this. If that is true, well, basically this part, right? But since I'm using style components, this is my way of doing it. Okay, now let's see if that works. So I'm going to decrease the time again and see if that changes. Yep, very nice. One thing that I'm noticing here is that this jumps directly, but the slide actually takes time. So we might want to add a transition here as well, which is basically the same transition. You can use a different one, but yeah, I would say just use the same transition, and then it's going to look nice. Yeah, perfect. So there again, you could say this is done now, but I want to do one more thing maybe, which is to make these clickable. So whenever we click on those, the slider should jump to that position. Now, we kind of already have this functionality, right? And we're already only increasing the index by 1, but I think we should be able to just set any number that is within our range, right? And that should work then. So let's try that. Let me extract that logic into a separate function. Function next, maybe next or next slide, and then slide index is going to be the current slide plus 1. Okay. Gonna take this here, and then we're gonna just call next slide in here. So I just moved that up basically. And here the slide index, gotta have that. Okay. So either we pass a slide index. Slide index is greater. Yeah, that should work fine. Slide index. So either we pass a slide index, right? And if we don't pass one, it's just going to take the next slide, let's say. And if either of those, either the past value or the fallback value is greater than our items that we have, it's just going to fall back to 0. But that probably shouldn't happen. Well, only in the case of trying to increase when at the last step. I just saw that. That should be it. Yeah, last one. And then it jumps back. Okay, perfect. Now let's use that and use that with the indicator. So I'm going to pass that function down to an indicator here. Indicator. Going to access that. Next slide. And then if I click on it, I'm going to set the next slide to the same index as the dot, right? Because they're matching. The second dot equals the second slide. So I can just use the index that I have here. And now if I click on here, well, it works just fine, right? And I can also go back. It goes to the second slide. First slide. And yeah, that works just fine. Now, since we already cleared the timer, that comes in handy because when we use that function to change the current slide when clicking on a dot, the effect will be called because the current slide changes, and the old timer will be cleared, and the new timer starts. Now, I'm just gonna give you an example. If we let's say the slider just goes on, and then I click on a dot at the end of the timer, I don't want to immediately go to the next slide, right? I want it to restart the timer. So let's say I'm here, and then I'm clicking on 3. It should restart the 3 seconds and not only be there for 500 milliseconds, for example. So this is why you would want to clear the timer instead of waiting every time for it to end. Yeah, okay. Well, I think this is it. Yeah, let me know how you like the building of that React.js image slider. Let me know if you have any questions, and otherwise, see you in the next one.